welcome to your vibrant velvet voice, Skywalker Payne. And we're going to talk about this intersection of generational trauma, classism, racism, and ancestral healing. But before we get into that discussion, I want to ask a few questions to put everything in a context. Does your family have a history of breast cancer or alcoholism, abuse or divorce or other problems? Were members of your family victims of war, rape, imprisonment, violence, or environmental disaster? Was your community or your family's communities attacked because of your race or religion? If you answered yes to one of those happening to you or your family, near family or distant family, you've experienced generational trauma. Did your family have a history of moving up from poor economic to or more rural areas to urban and better income? Were you denied a job because your skin was dark and your hair in dreadlocks? Or were you called country or worse names because of your physical appearance? If so, you experienced classism and racism. Now, have you found yourself sitting in silence and full sentences come clearly into your head as if someone is speaking to you? Have you dreamed of family members who's passed? Have you had an emotional feeling arise when you've heard stories about family members you barely remember or saw photos of them, or when you visited old homes or even the cemeteries? If so, you may have been experiencing an energetic connection to your ancestors. And it is the real existence of that energetic connection that ancestral healing rests in. And we're going to talk more about this. But you see, it's because of this intersection of these elements that you are in the center. And you're in the center because of your maternal and your paternal lineages. I want to tell you a story because I've grown, and I've been doing ancestral healings now for over a year, or about a year actually. And I received training. I received training from Jen the Rainmaker in the Toltec tradition. But the Toltec tradition is an earth-centered tradition, just as Vajrayana Buddhism, which I've practiced for over 20 years, just as African spirituality, which I've studied, and just as Hinduism, Kriya Yoga, based in the vastness of the universe and in the earth and the elements. And that's my training for ancestral healing specifically. And it's been a process with myself. But it was a process that I actually had an ancestral healing, which transformed me over a year ago. And since that time, I've been sharing the experience, doing ancestral healings. And when I began to explore my African spirituality, I finally set up my own ancestral altar, separate from my Buddhist altar. So during this process, and when the topic of generational trauma came up once again in the headlines with the death of Michael Williams, I started to think about trauma. And of course, ancestral healing is essential to confronting and dealing with generational trauma because we're dealing with generations and ancestors are part of that. We'll get into more details. I was thinking about trauma and I was thinking about my own life, that I've felt very blessed in my life because I haven't really had any big traumas, and some of my sisters did, and we've had deaths and some minimal violence, but not war, not major losses of our homes as children or as adults, and not even many deaths as children growing up, and even now as adults. Just our elders are gone. But as I looked at my family and I looked at how intelligent and creative we are, and I started to look at myself and recognize that as I've been on this entrepreneurial journey, I came to realize I'm not really as confident as I put off. I can tell stories, so I can act confident. And actually, I was raised by a woman who lived confidence, and we grew up with just making sure we looked nice, and we recognized that we were beautiful, even if other people didn't, which was my mother's bane, that because she was dark-skinned brown, she never won beauty awards. But also, she, being the daughter of my grandmother, who was more of an earth person than definitely not an urban woman, and lived very simply. We were intelligent, creative, and I got good grades in school and did all of that and graduated summa cum laude. But I've managed to live this long, thankfully, in good health, without ever, up until now, really acknowledging the blessings and the knowledge that I have to give the world. And as I've thought of that recently and looked at generational trauma, trauma does not have to be a big physical event. There is that trauma that comes from the overwhelming sense of unworthiness to have or ascribe for more, whether it's more freedom, more material possessions, more education, more health care, more food. How many of us have grown up fighting for that more, and all the time feeling inside we're not worthy of it? It's not for us. It's for those rich people or those capitalists or those. But if we step outside of where we are and look at the histories and the long existence of human beings and societies, there's always been the poor and the rich. And that's why we look at ancestral healing. Because we all have some form of generational trauma. Now, my generational trauma, for some people, may not seem that traumatic. Yeah, lack of confidence. So what? If you had done this, you could have gotten that. You could have. No. To finally be able at my advanced age, acknowledge that, hey, I am such a value, an ephemeral value, but here I am, sharing what I have to offer because it is important for the healing of this world. And it's through ancestral healing that I found this calling. And I know that it can be of benefit to so many people. And you may be one of those people. Now, let's look, in addition to what I've said in terms of my lineage, I am a professional oral storyteller, and I'm an author of 2 self-published books, and I have a long list of jobs, and I was even a registered nurse. But it was only in embracing ancestral healing that I was able to find a purpose and a release during that time a year ago, during the height of the demonstrations and the pandemic, people dying and getting beat, and the sorrow and the sadness. And it was overwhelming for many people. But I had had my transformational ancestral healing, in which I experienced and felt for the first time in my life what my ancestors, my female ancestors, felt and experienced coming from Africa. And I cried for 20 minutes during the healing. But after that healing, and soon after, I was able to start a project, Race, a concept explored in story. And I held circles, and one step led to another. And soon I realized that it's good to have racial story healing circles, but it's even better to have ancestral healing circles, because we all have ancestors and we're all connected. And how are we connected? We are connected by energy. This is the 21st century, and we are taught in school that the law of conservation is real, that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It is only transformed. And guess what? We all are energy. We are all energetic beings. We seem and feel real, and we just, oh, love, we got to hold on to this body. But in actuality, this body isn't real. There's these thousands and millions of microscopic things that are millions and spacious miles away. So it's this great and wondrous trick of this energy that creates us and that permeates the vast universe, which we are part of naturally. And we, during this time, are fortunate enough to transcend distance and miles and communicate through technology. So if we can do that, we can look into the concept of ancestral healing, because generational trauma is an experience that has gone down through our family. And just as I was giving my experience of lack of confidence, considering that my grandmother, on my mother's side, my mother's mother wasn't even a domestic. She did cleaning and she did house cleaning. She washed clothes. She did ironing. She was barely educated. I don't know if she even finished high school. But my mother, she graduated from college, which was a big jump. And she was able to do that because her dad was in the military and he left her money to go to college. And I never knew or met my granddad, Glenn, because he passed on. But he had confidence in himself. Confidence is hard for women to get. Because my mother, she went on. She got a master's degree. She did well. She could have done more. She did what she did. She did well. And she raised 4 women who graduated from high school, went on to college and careers, and are happy and have survived and lived and gave her grandchildren, all except me. Now, this is my grandchildren sharing ancestral healing and its power with you, with my family, with others. So we're looking at this circle, and we start with generational trauma, which interacts right next to classism and racism, because in too many instances, most really harsh trauma people experience arises from racism, being mistreated based on one's skin color or where you come from or the language you speak, or classism, which exists in every country, including Africa. Now, there's lots of us who have romanticized Africa, and we love Africa, and we want to go back to Africa. But I've been watching African TV. It's a good way to get to see Black people when you're living in a place like Homer, Alaska. And what I have seen from African TV, whether it's Kenya or Nigeria or South Africa, there's quite a lot of class differences going on in Africa. But even with the class differences, there's a little bit more in most cases, although sometimes there's some of those highfalutin people, as we would say, who don't want to talk to anyone who isn't of their class. But most of the Africans, they don't let their class differences get away from being kind and talking to each other. But there are class differences everywhere. There are racial differences everywhere, and they can lead directly to generational trauma. People can have their land taken away, family members can be murdered, they can experience rape, there can be abuse, there can be illnesses because of economic inabilities, and the list goes on and on and on. And it becomes generational trauma when these same things continue to be repeated over and over and over. So there's some people who still haven't been able to have someone in their family go to college. There's some people who continue to carry the same line of illnesses or diseases. There's some families that continue to have a high amount of cancer. These are generational problems brought on by generational trauma. Now, yes, there are medical reasons and scientific reasons for all of the diseases we know and the ones we don't know. But there are also spiritual and unseen and unknown reasons yet by science that can cause illness, and cause illnesses to continue. So we have talked about and explained easily how classism and racism can contribute directly to generational trauma. And it's not too difficult to understand that. And you've probably seen articles about it, generational trauma, because actually last year, there was a surge, almost a resurgence of articles and studies about generational trauma. Because a lot of these problems we have are totally even unconscious. Just like me, not realizing at this late date that I have been carrying this, I'm still not worthy, I can't get this inside of me. And for other people who are carrying illnesses around, the reason ancestral healing is so strong because it's rooted in humanity from our very beginnings, taking us all the way to our relationship with family and earth and the elements. As much as we all love technology, we're at this point in history and even the development of technology, and particularly with our planet, that we have to really look at how do we continue with the technology without taking care of the earth and our ancestors, because it is the separation from our ancestors which contributes significantly to our ongoing problems all around the world. And of course, this is a statement I can say, and I do not have any kind of scientific proof. There's no data, but just think about it. That how much of this dislike of different people, how many of these wars that continue on, how much of this hatred has gone on for generations from ancestors. So how can you clear it? And you can clear and release it. You can clear and release generational trauma. You can clear and release racial trauma. Now, of course, this doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen necessarily in 1 or 2 sessions, but it can be done if you want to do that. If you want to release yourself, and if you want to connect with your source of strength, which is your ancestors. Now, your good ancestors. And one thing that I've recently learned, and you might reflect on, is that all people in your family line who died, they may not be ancestors. They may not have earned that ability. And those are usually people who did not act well in life, who were not kind, who did not care about other people, or who even harmed others. And you may get in touch with those too, or have had bad dreams. And there's ways to neutralize that and protect yourself. But our ancestors are rooted in the rhythms of the earth and the universe. And that is where we are rooted and where we can find our own healing power and the power to heal and release our ancestors and ourselves from generational trauma. Now, I am not saying if you're receiving medical help or if you're seeing a psychologist to stop. I would never say that. For many of us, it takes as many tools as we can get. But the journey of ancestral healing is an energetic, or some people would say spiritual journey. It's one that does not require any religion, any belief, except beyond belief, the knowing that we are energetic beings and that your ancestors' energy still exists and can touch and reach you, and you can touch and reach and benefit them and benefit from them. It has been a pleasure talking to you. Remember your ancestors. Think about your ancestors, because if you didn't have ancestors, you wouldn't be here today. With gratitude.
Thank you for spending another few minutes with your vibrant velvet voice, Skywalker Payne. And you can always hear me or see me on my website, vibrantvelvetvoice.net, or on Facebook at Unified Synergy. And of course, you can always subscribe to the Vibrant Velvet Voice app. And if you want to spend a little money and help keep this show going, why don't you buy a cup of coffee for Skywalker Payne or become a Patreon member at Patreon/Vibrant Velvet Voice. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to talking to you again. With gratitude.